Mayor, thank you so much for joining me. As you leave office, I'm wondering what are the emotions that are now playing out for you?
Well, first, Rachel, it's good to be with you. My primary emotion is that of gratitude to be the mayor of the city you were born in, that your parents grew up in, and to be able to make the kind of impact that we've had all throughout the city and in such a positive way, and take on the challenges that have come our way has just been a real blessing for me. So it's also a little bittersweet, obviously. You can get so much done as the mayor of a city like this and help so many people. So I'm going to miss that platform for sure. I'll continue to help as a citizen in many different ways, but I'm going to miss that. What I won't miss is, being mayor of a good sized city like ours is a 24/7, 16-hour a day type of thing. And I like to work, and I've certainly put in the time, but the schedule won't be quite as intense here after January the 2nd.
I'm going to talk about politics and the toll it can take in just a little bit. I'm curious, have you talked to Mayor-elect Greenberg? And if you have, what advice have you offered him?
Yes, numerous times. And of course, I knew the mayor-elect long before either of us thought about running for public office. So, he's a smart guy, and he knows what needs to be done, and certainly the importance of building a team. But right now, he's got to be thinking about the budget for next year. He's got to be thinking about getting his team together, kind of minimizing change where he doesn't need to make change, because there's a lot of things that happen in the mayor's office. We always say we don't know what, when, or where, but something's going to happen every day, and the scope of it can be small to quite intense. So it's about getting that together, your team, setting the values for your administration, and thinking about your first 100 days and what that looks like.
Let me ask you, as far as for you personally, what's next as you leave office?
Well, I'm taking on a pause. This has been a very busy 12 years. I had a very good business career before I was mayor, thankfully. So I've got several nice trips planned with my wife and kids later on in the year. I'm going to spend more time with my granddaughters here at home as well. And going to stay involved with some areas that I'm passionate about, like compassion, gun violence reduction, education, do some work with various mayors around the country as well. But it's going to be on a far reduced schedule. And it'll be, a year or so before if I decide to get anything quite as intense as what I'm in right now. But I'm going to continue to try to make a difference and help people. I've done that my whole life and build organizations with high skill sets. So we'll see where the future takes us. But it's going to be the place where I can kind of get the most return on my time to do the most good.
Ever think of politics again, or is it too soon to say?
That's too soon to say. Kentucky is a tough state to run statewide right now, as you're the outgoing mayor of Louisville. But that might change over time as well. Politics is so important to our country, but it's a screwed up industry. And I can say that, being in business my whole life. The difference between business and politics: in business, when you have a problem, we identify the problem and then we say, okay, how are we going to solve it? When there's a problem or a challenge in the political world, people want to blame you. The media wants to attack you, versus saying, okay, what happened? Now let's solve it. So all that other stuff is just kind of wasted energy that takes away from fixing something. And my experience in life is, whether it's a family unit or a business unit or a government unit, things are going to happen. So then it's like, how do you approach the things? Get to work on them, be honest about what's taking place, but solve the problem with as little drama as possible. And politics is just not really geared toward that right now in America in 2022.
We know it can certainly be toxic. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Do you remember the feeling when you were sworn in, back in 2011 as the 50th mayor? And do you feel like it's been mission accomplished for you?
It was a great feeling. Most exhilarating feeling is when you win a very close race. And you'll recall that first cycle that I was in 2010, that was the Tea Party wave blowing through the country. So there was a lot of change taking place of who was getting elected into office. So we had a great team effort and won that race, and then carried that kind of momentum through the transition period into my inaugural address, where I felt great hope for the city and said, we're going to guide our city through the values of lifelong learning, health, and compassion. We're going to reposition our city So we're part of a different global conversation in terms of our relevance and our innovation. So yes, I feel like we've done that. The city's gone through a real renaissance. We're handing off a city that's in really good shape to the next mayor. When you think about the built environment of our city and the remaking of downtown, $24 billion of capital, construction, 2 new big Ohio River Bridges projects, our edge neighborhoods, it just goes on and on. So the city looks different. When we talk about education, the main reason I ran for a 3rd term was to make sure the Evolve 502 promise scholarships were funded. We were working on that for 10 years. So, every JCPS graduate now has a free college scholarship to either Jefferson or Simmons, affordable housing investments at record paces, West Louisville investments. So it goes on and on. So I'm very proud of our team. I'm proud of our city because the mayor doesn't get these things done by himself or herself, right? It's about setting a vision, providing resources, monitoring and diagnosing, but then having great partnership with big companies and individuals. So we've done that, and we've weathered some challenges, obviously, that have been thrown our way as well, and the city's in a much better spot now.
Those 3 pillars that you talked about, you wanted to make it a city of lifelong learning, a healthier city, and a city of even greater compassion. Do you feel like you lived into all of those?
Absolutely. When you think about lifelong learning, as I just talked about, the Evolve 502 scholarships, just think, Rachel, now, no one in the city and Jefferson County Public Schools and all their 100,000 students can say, we can't afford to send our kids to college anymore. That's off the table. Everybody has a free scholarship. When you talk about health and you see the results that we had during the pandemic, where our minority population suffered disproportionately in terms of infections and deaths, which was unusual for all of America. And then when you talk about compassion, whether it's our Give a Day, weeks of service, 1.4 million acts of service, the way that we got through the protest and the involvement of the protesters, de-escalation of police, that showed to me that we've got a lot of muscle in terms of compassion and interdependence as a city to move through. Now, I want to be clear. None of these values are ever done. There's not a check mark, right? It's a goal. It's a noble goal that you keep pursuing. And we've got measurable progress in all 3 of those areas.
And I wanted to ask you about that. You talked about the protests and Breonna Taylor. Was that the toughest time for you?
No question it was, because think what was going on. We had the pandemic, then we had the protests. I was the president of the United States Conference of Mayors at that same time, which was the last 6 months of the Trump administration when he was attacking cities. So I had to fend him off as best I could on a national basis. So you put all that together, it was very difficult, and it should be difficult, right? It's a once in a century pandemic. It's racial justice protests that last time it happened in America were the 50s. And then, of course, we had our own personal tragedy here with Breonna and her family, and the Girths and the McAtees as well. The pain on those families was immeasurable. We can work through as a city to get through protests and all that, but those families will have forever lost their loved ones, and that you can't change that. But I think the strength that we showed as a city in terms of how to make statements about injustice, about the state of race in America, we did that and acknowledged our First Amendment while we were doing that. The kind of pain and suffering relative to property that we have happened here was practically non-existent compared to, let's say, to Minneapolis, where 500 buildings were burned down. Here it was 0. So I think a lot of the work that we've done on compassion over the years paid off because we all knew each other. I knew most all the protesters, except the ones from out of town. And then the protesters, thankfully, got involved with reform efforts that we took underway as well. So it wasn't, they knew it wasn't enough just to march, but we've got to get involved with process to change things, like our civilian review board, for one thing. But it was unprecedented time in the history of our city. There's no one perfect way to do it. Rachel, I often see people that will say, Mayor, I don't agree with everything you did during the summer of 2020, but I don't know what I would have done any differently. So it was just a tough time, but we got through it.
That was one question I wanted to ask. Obviously, anybody at that time was going to have their share of critics. We know that. Looking back, is there anything, hindsight's always 2020, that you wish you had done differently during that time at all?
Well, my North Star during that time was the truth, getting to the truth, not impeding any investigations because I didn't want an outcome to be tainted. So, as soon as it became apparent the scope of the challenge and the tragedy as it related to Breonna Taylor, I said, we're going to stop investigating ourselves within LMPD and hand these files over to the FBI and then to the Attorney General here in Kentucky, because I wanted independent oversight of these investigations. That frustrated people that didn't think I was moving quickly enough. And people thought I should have been the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The mayor does not have all of those powers to start with. And secondly, I just thought that would have been wrong because I didn't have all the facts because the investigations were not completed. I think the Department of Justice, obviously, I think did a good, thorough job with their investigation. And it takes time to do that. And I understand why people get impatient throughout that as well. So in terms of how things proceeded, I think I would basically do it the same way. Now, to prevent something like this from happening, what I've really depended on throughout my administration have been audits and third-party certifications of various departments. And in 2016, LMPD was a 21st century policing model amongst 15 cities. I wish we had deeper audits within the departments so that you could get to a level, let's say a search warrant process, for instance, and measure that so that you knew it's operating with absolute fidelity. And if that's the case, perhaps the search warrants would not have been administered the way that they were. We'll never know that. The one area that I could control was a quick settlement with the family on the civil suit. And so we moved with great thought and great haste to get that done.
Let me ask you, and I saw, the news that Erica Shields is stepping down, and you issued a statement about her. What you'd like to say about Erica Shields and her coming in at obviously a very difficult time?
Well, that's the hallmark of a great leader. She knew that she was coming into the fire. She also knew that our police department here in Louisville needed some stabilization. And she also knew that policing around America was at an inflection point. So she's done an incredible job as our police chief here in Louisville. I think we all owe her a big debt of gratitude, the way that she came in and stabilized the department. She will be extremely successful at whatever she decides to do in the future. So she's a top-notch pro.
Let me talk to you about the next mayor will have term limits now, can only serve 2 terms. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's a mistake. When I think about some of the things that took more than 2 terms to get done here, I hope that's not an impediment for the next mayor. For instance, Evolve 502, I'll go back to get that again, the free college scholarships. That was over a 10-year journey. So some of the things that are really big take time. And if the people want to keep electing the mayor to keep moving forward, I think the people should have the opportunity to do that. So frankly, I think it was a cheap shot by the legislature here at Louisville. It was unnecessary. The people should be able to decide who they want to have in office.
On a lighter note, before I get to some of the tolls of politics, bourbonism, that's been a fun thing that you've really enjoyed heading up. The Fraser History Museum has certainly benefited from it, being the starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Your thoughts on that? I mean, you have seen this industry take off and you've embraced it from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's one of the things I ran on office for, Rachel, was I couldn't understand. So I'm a business guy. I'm thinking, like, what's your value proposition? A value proposition is something that your company has or sells that nobody else has, that you're uniquely good at, and that's why you have customers. So I was thinking, as a city, what's our value proposition? We've got many of them, but one of them is we're home to 95% of the world's bourbon comes through Kentucky. So why aren't we creating experiences like that, like they have in Napa Valley for wine? So early on in my administration, we started convening people and talking about all that, from our great chefs, local food experiences, and of course our bourbon industry. And out of that came bourbonism, this great tourism experience, the dozen plus distillery experiences we have, hundreds of restaurants, the Bourbon and Beyond Music Festival, explosion of our arts community. So it's been a fun thing. One of the fun things about being mayor I like is the arts and the festivals and bringing people together, because you build social bonds and community while you're doing that. And why not do that around something that we have that's unique to us, bourbon. We always wanted it to be a 4-star, 5-star type of experience, not people coming to Louisville, like let's say they go to New Orleans for Bourbon Street or now Nashville for Broadway. It's like, we're going to go there and get trashed. That is not what bourbonism is all about. It's more of a high class experience, tourism, history thrown in, good food. And of course, the Fraser is the perfect example of that, where you all are the starting of the whole bourbon trail right now. And you blend history and good food, good spirits together. And then people then embark throughout the rest of the city and the rest of the state. And it's also helped the built environment of downtown, where we've got, beautiful Main Street, East Market Street, all the central business district now with these bourbon experiences. And it's just been so much fun to see the bourbon tourist walking up and down Main Street. It's helped our economy, especially now when people are working more from home in the post-pandemic environment.
It certainly has helped ours. We can attest to that.
Yeah.
A couple of just some rapid fire questions to wrap up. What would you say was the biggest lesson that you learned about yourself in office?
About myself, be patient. There's so many different factors that go into creating an equitable city and approaching them from a capital investment standpoint, human health, education, housing. So take the time to understand how these systems work, right? Because if you change one thing, it could have unintended consequences somewhere else. So be patient, get the data together, think about how it impacts the whole system, involve people, and then make your best decisions.
And politics, we talked about how tough it is right now, really how toxic it is. And I always wonder with politicians, when I read all of the threads underneath things, do you read those? Does it bother you? I mean, how did you weather the storm when it comes to critics of politicians?
I quit reading that stuff a long time ago. If you're not in the arena doing the work, it's real easy from the cheap seats to take a shot at something. If you're a critic that has an idea, number one, and has some experience to back it up, or will at least try working with us, then I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. But if you're just taking pot shots, I really don't have any time for you. There's too much to do. There's too many people that need help. There's too many opportunities that we have as a city to get sidetracked by just, cheap social media world. Think about how much that's changed, Rachel. When I think about all the big changes since I took office as mayor, social media went from us just sharing pictures of our families to just a cesspool of disinformation. Think about the change in guns and gun laws. Guns are everywhere now. Gun laws are practically non-existent. It's a real danger to our entire country. 12 years ago, there wasn't even much opioid use. Now think about deadly fentanyl that's out there. And then political tribalism. So, these things are roiling our whole country right now. And I hope you got to manage them as best you can when you're mayor and hopefully get to a better tomorrow. And there's always challenges, but there's been a lot of big things that have changed in the 12 years since I've been mayor on a national and global basis.
Absolutely. You said with your legacy, when you were sworn in, you wanted to be the people's mayor. Do you feel like that is true? And when people mention your name, what are you hoping they say?
What I get from people is you're everywhere. And I've always enjoyed that. One of my business maxims was get out of the office because you got to understand what your customers want. In the case of the mayor, your customers are your residents here and the visitors. So you've got to be experiencing their lives 24/7. In the highest moments of triumph and the lowest moments of tragedy. And my schedule can attest that that's what I've done. And I enjoyed that because as a mayor, people feel like you're their neighbor and a good neighbor. And so I want to bond with people kind of heart to heart to really understand the kind of life that they're going through. So I've made it really important to show up often, whether it's been the barbershops of the city or the boardrooms of the city. So to me, that would be a great honor to be known as the people's mayor, because that means you're running your government in concert with what the people need.
And final question, if you had to come up with a headline of your tenure, what would it be?
Let's see. Well, I'd say city undergoes renaissance while facing challenges head on. positive mayor working every day to help people reach their full potential.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for all the wonderful work you've done as a journalist and extending that over to the Fraser, and now everything that Fraser is doing for the city. You all are a big part of the success of our city.
Well, and I appreciate your coming to some of the programs and the apology that you gave here at the Fraser to the Black Six. We thank you for that.
Well, that was a meaningful moment for me, and I think for them and for our city as well. That sometimes people in the majority, and by that I mean in this case white folks, don't understand the kind of injustice in the centuries-long injustice again that our Black population has had to endure. And a simple apology on behalf of the institution of the mayor of this city definitely was in order to what took place with them some 60 years ago now, and it seemed to help a little bit. I think one of the things that I've really focused on this time of being mayor is normalizing conversations about racism, because obviously it's still here in our country. It's the result of a lot of the systems that our country has put in place. And until we get rid of racism, until we get rid of injustice and inequity, we're not going to reach our full potential as a country. So removing that and helping our Black populations, our minority populations is good for everybody.
And the work continues. And thank you again. I do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. The work will never be over.